Um, our guest tonight, Senator Colbeck, is currently serving his second term in his elected office as state senator for Michigan's 7th district. And that's you're from Canton, and that's kind of is it more the west side of the state or northwest? Okay, thanks. He's a graduate from the University of Michigan, yay, with a bachelor's and master's degree in aerospace engineering, as well as a graduate of the Life Sciences Department of the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. He has over 20 years of experience and management experience in a variety of industries, including engineering, responsibility for key elements of the life support system for the International Space Station, instruction of students at Space Camp, program management leadership for advanced training and simulation for the Department of Defense, and running his own small business. Senator Colbeck currently serves on the following committees: Elections and Government Reform. He serves as a vice chair. Education, Judiciary, Veterans, Military Affairs and Homeland Security Committee, and State Police and Military Affairs Appropriations subcommittees. The senator is consistently rated as one of the most conservative senators in the Michigan legislature. During his tenure in the legislature, the senator has demonstrated a persistent focus on solving problems for his constituents and not playing politics. The senator has received numerous recognitions for his efforts, including the Senator Paul Fannin Statesman of the Year Award from the National Right to Work for his leadership in making Michigan the nation's 24th right to work state. The Golden Apple Award for his efforts to expand school choice for parents, and the Legislator of the Year awards from the Senior Alliance, the Police Officers Association of Michigan, and Associated Builders and Contractors. His staunch support for the military is highlighted by his role as co-founder and board member for the Freedom Center Hospitality Center at Detroit Metro Airport and the Lansing and Troy Military Entrance Processing Stations. And he lives with his wife, Angie, in Canton. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight Senator Colbeck.
All right, note to self, shortened biography on the website. Thank you guys for all coming out tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about a subject that you should listed all the committees that I'm serving on. You notice you didn't hear the word chairman in front of any of those committees? It's because of this issue. I specifically asked why wasn't I granted any chairmanships, and I was told that the #1 issue was my fight against Medicaid expansion. Second was fight against Common Core, which I'm still fighting, by the way. I don't know if how many of you guys know that we have new social studies standards that have been proposed and new science standards. I proposed some revisions to the science standards, essentially just asking them to appreciate science, and I feel pretty qualified to go off and talk about engineering and science, but those revisions were rejected. But we're making progress on the social studies standards, and I got to admit, I think social studies standards are more critical, and because they get to the essence of what it means to be an American. One of the things that wasn't talked about in that bio, although it was the fact that, I don't know if you guys knew this, but I came out of the Tea Party. So I came out of the Rattle With Us Tea Party out in Plymouth. My wife and I, 5 years ago, or actually 6 years ago, didn't know anything about politics. And we got involved in the Tea Party, and as Bill knows, this is one of those weird stories where I'm not one of those guys that ever wanted to be in politics. As you can tell, I mean, I liked aerospace engineering. I was a product of the Star Wars generation, the first Star Wars movie back in '77. And I had a lot of fun doing that, and I enjoyed that career. But when my wife and I moved back to Michigan, I noticed I spent a lot of time on the road because we didn't have jobs here in Michigan. And everything you're talking about in those core principles for the Tea Party here is something I believe in. And frankly, the scary part about it, when you say that you're for enforcing the Constitution, the idea of limited government, living within your means, and the idea of just, what was the last one you had up there? It was, okay, quick, core principle quiz. Who got the third one? I feel like Rick Perry right now. Holding legislators accountable. I'm for their oaths of office. But you know what that used to be? That used to be called being an American. That's the thing that really ticks me off about this. This isn't about party. This is about being an American. And when I see a constitution that says that that we're supposed to be providing equal benefits for everybody, that means you don't do these targeted picking winners and losers and policies and stuff like that. You're doing something that's in the best interest of everybody in the state. And so anyway, when we got into Healthy Michigan, one of the big fights was I said, well, let's find a solution. If the problem associated with folks not being able to receive good care is that the cost of medical care is too high, let's find a way to lower the cost of medical care for everybody. And when you do that, you find out that the folks that are in this expansion population that's now up to over 583,000 additional Medicaid enrollees, we started out as 1.8 million in a state that has a population of 10 million. So about 24% of the state's population is eligible and enrolled in Medicaid. How's that for a look forward into what our budget's going to look like? So I said, let's find a way to go off and solve the problem for everybody. And back in 2013, when this legislation first came up, or at least when it came to a boil, if you will, is when I was pushing very hard for an alternative to Medicaid expansion, something I called patient-centered care solution. I was able to get one of the key tenets of that legislation passed, and it's for a service called, or it's for a healthcare delivery mechanism called direct primary care services. You guys ever hear of that before? Good. Where? Oh, awesome. Chad's going to be at a forum that I'm giving out in Lansing in January, at the end of January. Chad is phenomenal. Yeah, exactly. And now, flash forward and apply that kind of saving level to the largest line item in our budget, which is Medicaid. It's a $17 billion line item. Now, studies have been shown to go off and demonstrate that if you apply direct primary care services, which, by the way, let me describe what that is. It's essentially, the operative word is direct. And you know what direct stands for? It means that you have an agreement, a contractual agreement between a consumer or a patient and the doctor. There's no middleman. There's no government involved in it at all, except in our case we had to say you have to make sure that you got a contract that says what your terms are up front for your services. But the rub of it is, because it is direct, you don't need all the admin personnel, you don't need all the support, you're not going off and jumping through hoops, you don't have to worry about accounts receivable lags in a doctor's office, and it ends up costing over 20% less overall with your comparative plan. So if you start taking a number like 20% and apply it to another number like $17 billion in Medicaid, do you still think we need to raise taxes to fix our roads? That's $3.4 billion, right? Well, I always deliberately lowball on some of that because I want to. If I've talked to folks out in the state of Washington where they've deployed this direct primary care approach on their Medicaid population, they got savings on upwards of 50%. And you know what killed it? Or not killed it. I don't want to say it killed it, but what happened was they had an arrangement. And they were saving so many people so much money. Patients weren't going to the hospital as often because they were getting higher quality care for less money. That all of a sudden the number of claims started going down. And when the number of claims started going down, the managed care outfits that were acting as the go-between didn't see as much money coming in, and the hospitals weren't seeing as much business because people were healthier, so they had to decrease the number of people enrolled in it. Some of these things that happen in government just cheese me off. And the idea of a program being de-scoped because it was working and people were getting healthier and you were spending less money is the epitome of something that frustrates the heck out of me. Yeah, we got. There's a wide variety of different types of legislators up in Lansing, and I wish I would have had more support for the options that we had to go off and make sure that we had solutions that work for everybody. But we're starting to get traction on it, and I'm going to start pushing on some of those alternatives as we go forward in this new year. We're getting traction on direct primary care. Its first effective year of being law was as of April of last year, and since that point in time, we've, as you see, Dr. Chad Savage is one of the onesie-twosie practices that kicked off, but there's also a network of about 100 physicians in Southeast Michigan and another one of 150 physicians in Southeast Michigan that are starting to adopt this care model, and it's all over the state. I get calls all the time from different physicians that want to engage in this. This is the real promise on how to get free market health care reform into as a replacement to Obamacare, and it's something that I'm extremely passionate about because I see this right now. It's taking advantage of what I call a free market loophole in the Affordable Care Act. In Section 10,104, and yes, I was one of the weirdos that actually read the Affordable Care Act. In Section 10,104, there's an exemption for what are called direct primary care medical home services, and essentially that's been used as a opening for direct primary care services in states across the country. And my goal is to drive a Mack truck through that hole, and to the point where everybody's wondering what the purpose of these 159 new organizations that have been created between a doctor and a patient under Obamacare, what that purpose is for. So if you're getting people good care without needing those 159 new organizations, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to pull the Band-Aid off quickly and get rid of those organizations and get back into free market health care, which truly does have the opportunity to achieve the stated objectives of Obamacare, which is to lower costs, improve care, improve access to coverage, right? What are we getting? Not so much, right? So we're going to talk today about Healthy Michigan and its status. It did get passed back in 2013, and one of the reasons I don't have that chairmanship is because when Healthy Michigan came up for a vote, it was a 19-19 tie, and if I would have had my vote up there, and I decided that I'd forget to vote at that particular time because then it keeps it from going into a tiebreaker. The Lieutenant Governor has already stated he'd support it, and so I just somehow forgot to vote. That lasted for about 3 hours where we actually defeated it, and they got somebody to flip, and now we're dealing with Healthy Michigan right now. So now the key is, what do we do now? Well, in Healthy Michigan, if you could kick into the first slide here, in Healthy Michigan, there were kind of three areas or three terms that required interaction with the federal government or involved interaction with the federal government that could eventually lead to the repeal of Healthy Michigan. So there was essentially some poison pills built into the legislation in order to get enough votes to pass it. Well, waiver number one's already been issued. That's not a big deal. Waiver number two was just issued back on December 17th, and so the federal government was required to issue this a waiver that said after 48 months on Medicaid, you had to go either to the healthcare.gov and get a subsidized plan on the health exchange, the federal health exchange, or you had to start paying an increased portion of the costs associated with that coverage. I've looked at the document, and if you look at the cover letter, it says that the federal government's approving it, but then one of the paragraphs down below says, subject to the following conditions and special terms and conditions. And go to the next. Oh, sorry. I will go back into that a little bit later. Then if you go back. All right. So I'm evaluating whether or not I'm putting the burden of proof right now on DHHS to say that it complied with the letter of the law right now, and we'll go into some of the reasons why it's not so easy to necessarily discern that with what's been provided right now, but we'll get into that a little bit. But bottom line is that waiver is not valid, and it doesn't address the statutory requirements of Healthy Michigan, and since we have no chance for the federal government to revise it by December 31st, that date's already gone and passed. If it's not in compliance, then Healthy Michigan dies on April 30th of this year. If it is in compliance, that's a moot point, and there's one other opportunity for Healthy Michigan to die on the vine, and that is there's another provision that says once the savings, i.e. that's how it was pitched, Medicaid expansion was pitched on the basis of the fact that it would actually save us money, right? And by the way, it was all those savings were supposed to be put off into a lockbox, and then when it came time for us to start paying an increasing share of the cost for this new Medicaid expansion population, we would dip into that savings and pay it. Well, I'm here to tell you that savings, that lockbox is empty. There is no such thing. And they've been backfilling a lot of general fund on a regular basis, so we haven't really been getting the savings. The next slide will show you a little bit of that. But before we get into that, I want to make sure everybody's clear that I want to make sure on the Medicaid expansion thing that, as you can tell by the floor speech we talked about, and there's actually better studies since that floor speech came out that highlight that Medicaid actually hurts the poor. It doesn't actually help the poor. And there's a great book by Ovik Roy called How Medicaid Hurts the Poor. It's a real short one, but it gives a very good synopsis of not only the Oregon health insurance experiment, but also one by University of Virginia, which had like 700,000 people surveyed in it. And bottom line is, we can get better care by not being insured than actually being insured under Medicaid, because it gives you these false hopes. And whenever you get into a system that's rationing care, it just drags it out and drags it out and drags it out, and to the point where by the time you actually do see somebody who can take care of you, it's too late. And my wife's a physician, by the way, a pediatrician, so for me it's a pretty passionate topic here. So I want people to get good care. I want everybody here to have access to good care. I want to make sure we have policies that benefit everybody, not just one small sliver of the population. And Medicaid, it just does not cut it. It costs too much, and it provides too little value, and I provided an alternative to it, like I talked about before, called the Patient-Centered Care Solution. You can find more information on that, as well as more video clips, as well as all my editorials leading up to this. I've probably got like 10 editorials on the subject of healthcare alone up on my website, and it's at morninginmichigan.com. So if you ever want to go up there and follow what's going on, morninginmichigan.com. I got a lot of data up there. I got something called the Solution Center. That's where you can find the stuff on healthcare. I've also got something called the Data Center that provides all the supporting data, white papers, and everything else to support this. We use that extensively when we pass right to work, too. That's the same idea. It was via information. So I want people to get good health care. It's just that there's a better way of going off and doing that, and that doesn't put a burden on the taxpayers. So here's those savings. There's that savings account. So this is according to Senate Fiscal Agency. It popped up in our high water mark is in fiscal year 15, but as you can see, when we get out into fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20, we start getting below water. And what happens in 2017 is that the federal government starts dropping their reimbursement rates. I think that's in the next slide. Yeah. So in FY17, all of a sudden, what used to be 100% reimbursement by the federal government now starts turning into a 95% reimbursement, up until the point where eventually in fiscal year 2020, we get to the point where it's only 90% contribution from the federal government. Now, to put that in context, I'll go back. To put that in context, we've got essentially about $5,000 a year to pay for each one of the enrollees, especially in the expansion population. 5,000 times new Medicaid population, that's about 2.4 million enrollees. It's going to be an increased burden of about $291 million a year. Now, you guys all remember the sit and spin that was done on the roads, right? Do you realize why it took so long to get the roads package passed? They were all clamoring over this the common pot of money called the general fund. You guys know what the general fund is? That's the money we can spend on anything. Well, guess what they wanted to spend that money on? They wanted to spend it on Medicaid expansion and backfilling some of the potholes and the assumptions that they had particularly around community mental health. They thought that they get reimbursed for some services that the federal government didn't reimburse them for, so we didn't see those savings. And so a lot of the pushback, frankly, and why it took so long, because I was advocating solutions that said, look, we got general fund here. If you actually focus on building roads that last longer, you may need a short infusion of cash to go off and get it so that we get rid of our poor quality roads, but over not too long a period of time, you're going to get to the point where you don't even need the money we currently have invested in transportation because we're repairing the roads less frequently. And I actually went to the point of challenging anybody, Republican or Democrat, to debate on the flaws in that analysis, and one of the Democrats actually accepted the challenge. That's not who I wanted to accept the challenge. I wanted somebody who was pushing it that had control over that to accept that challenge. And I think it's telling that nobody was able to support the need for that tax increase enough that they felt like they could debate it in a high-profile situation. So the battle over that general fund is what was really circling around that, because there's that temporary infusion of general fund cash that we could have put towards building roads that last longer that nobody else wanted to touch, and partly because it was being reserved for this. So next slide, please. All right, this is going to get a little bit in the weeds. I don't want to bore you with this too much, but I want to get out the details. Here's the actual language of the waiver number 2 requirements in the Healthy Michigan Act. And you notice what it says is that, well, first of all, I want to point out that this is only talking about pulling back on Healthy Michigan for the population that's between 100 and 133% of the federal poverty limit. There's a lot of segments of the Medicaid expansion population that were below 100%. They were going to keep those 100% no matter what. So the idea that we'd have a full repeal of it was never in the cards. It was only a partial repeal at best. But anyway, I digress. But the options that were supposed to be put in here for waiver number 2 was just like I talked about. Number 1, they can go off and change their medical system, their program to go to the health exchange, so to go to the federal health exchange and actually get on the healthcare.gov site. Or they can accept an increased cost-sharing burden. Now, the devil's in the details in this. That's why it's not so straightforward. In the actual memo that was issued by the federal government, they made no reference to a 3% threshold of income for cost sharing. For them, it was a 2% threshold for cost sharing all the way through it. And so the devil is in how the actual Department of Health and Human Services is going to implement this waiver. Are they going to assume the 3% threshold, or are they going to assume the 2%? Clearly, to be compliant with the statute, they got to be 3%. Now, it may just be quibbling on it, but from a perspective of rule of law, it either is compliant with the statute or it's not. And if it's not compliant with the statute, it goes bye-bye by law, if we actually enforce the law. And I will do my best to make sure we enforce it. So this is kind of the minutia here. And if you're wondering what the heck am I reading all this kind of stuff for, as you can tell, I was an engineer. I like reading specs. This is no big deal. It's but you got to deal. This is where the devil literally is in the details in all legislation. Kevin can attest to that and a lot of other stuff that's going through here. You have to read these bills. And in this case, this is a key point of contention. Next slide, please. All right. So if the waiver is not consistent, then that medical coverage shall no longer be provided. But once again, that's only the 100 to 133%. Next slide. All right, so here's what the waiver said that the federal government granted. So first of all, they mixed up the fact that we're talking about 48 months of coverage versus 48 months since the passage of the bill. But other than the fact that they didn't understand what our legislation was actually asking them to do, they were talking about the idea of using a different cost-sharing model. And that's what we're going to be digging into when we actually see whether it's not it's the plan that the DHHS puts together is compliant or not. And I also want to highlight that this doesn't affect any of the folks below 100%. So no matter what, we're still going to be expanding Medicaid. It's just a matter of how far are we expanding it. So, and I already highlighted that 166-page special terms and conditions is attached to it, which I've started going through. And then the key section that it's all kind of connecting to is the idea of maintaining healthy behaviors. So if you put together a health plan with an approved physician, then all of a sudden you get to the point where, per the federal government's waiver language, you won't have to absorb some of the cost-sharing burden that you would otherwise have to absorb. So if you're a good boy and you actually do what the federal government tells you to do, you don't have to pay as much. So next slide. The reason I'm concerned that the federal government is not respecting that 3% threshold is because of this diagram in particular. You can't read it out there. Don't worry about it. These are just different paths. This is the path that says if you complete a health risk assessment, you're a good person and you don't have to worry about any increased cost sharing. And this side, what it's saying is essentially it calls out that 2% threshold. So it doesn't even recognize the terms of that Healthy Michigan waiver request in that diagram. That tells me they may not be on the same page with us. Part of me also says that they just kept it in as boilerplate because that's what they had before, and they wanted the cover letter to supersede what was in their special terms and conditions. That's why it ultimately comes down to how is the department going to react to this waiver issuance, and what policies are they going to implement. Next slide. All right, so got a couple different scenarios. Approve waiver number 2 as written. I would submit that the federal government did not do so, but the jury's still out on that. The other option is that DHHS says, well, fine, that's what the federal government says, here's what we're going to go off and implement, and they do it in a way that's compliant with the statute. And then the last one is, okay, fine, let's just assume Healthy Michigan's repealed. Yes, there's going to be 583,000 enrollees that are going to be in need of some sort of health care. How about if we finally get serious about implementing a free market health care system in the state and use that as a springboard to make sure that they can get good quality health care at an affordable price? And that's what I'm prepping for right now. I think that's it. All right, good. So probably more than you wanted to see in regards to the Healthy Michigan, right? Unfortunately, there's a little bit of a gray cloud right now. And what I have drafted that's going out to the department tomorrow, as soon as I get into the office tomorrow to sign it, is a letter that's going to say, demonstrate to me how you comply with the statute of Healthy Michigan. The response that they provide to that letter will tell me whether or not we aren't compliant with the statute or not. I'll go off and do a proctology exam on the response to make sure that it's valid. And if it's something that demonstrates that it is not in compliance with the statute, then I go to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General will be asked to issue an opinion as to whether or not this is active or not. And there's going to be a short timeline on it because according to statute, it would stop on April 30th. And according to statute, on January 31st, all those enrollees need to be notified that it's no longer active. I don't know about you guys, but I watch a lot about what President Obama does with his pen and a phone up in D.C., and he rewrites laws on a regular basis, in particular Obamacare, which, by the way, in case I didn't mention it, don't be deceived. Healthy Michigan is nothing but Medicaid expansion, which is nothing but Section 2001 of H.R. 3590, which is Obamacare. So if you support Medicaid expansion, you're supporting Obamacare. As a matter of fact, a lot of the terms and conditions around Medicaid coverage are the same whether or not you're on the exchange or whether or not you're on Medicaid. The only difference is how much of the bill you're going to have to fork out. So there's a progression for the push towards a single payer, single set of requirements. That's already happening, folks. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this, because I came out in the Tea Party even before I ever thought about running for office, and I actually read the Affordable Care Act. Actually, the first version of it, which is H.R. 3200. It was 1,017 pages, did a speech at it on Kellogg Park out in Plymouth, and then the final version that came out, which is H.R. 3590, is what we have now. I saw that this is more about control than it is about care. This is undermining our freedom as a country, and that is something that I ain't going to let go with without a fight, and I'm going to continue that fight wherever I can. So with that being said, that's all I had planned on talking about this issue specifically. We could go into a lot more weeds if you want on it, but I figure you guys might want to, if you don't want to talk about this, you might have some questions on some other topics that are popping up in Lansing I might be able to help out on. So with that being said, that's it for me. Okay. So now that you guys know that the only good speakers in this place are the ones that are hanging from the ceiling. All right, sorry.
So does anybody have any questions for the senator? It doesn't have to be about Healthy Michigan, right? And I am going to come to you with the microphone so everybody can hear.
I heard this morning a little bit on Frank Beckman about the GOP talking about increasing the sales tax again, and I got confirmation you heard it on the radio this morning also, but you told me earlier there's nothing, you hadn't heard anything, but there is something going on.
Obviously, somebody was a little bit too overactive over the holidays and got some, instead of having visions of sugar plums dancing in their heads, they were dreaming of some other bad things. So I honestly don't see how that would go anywhere. It needs 2/3 support in both the House and the Senate in order to get onto the ballot because it's a constitutional amendment. So I think it might have been just to appease people that they told that that's what they would do over the summer. So I honestly don't see any legs for that. And by the way, when you got $1 billion lapse fund from the budget from last year and you're sitting there saying, no, we need more, that shouldn't be a starter in any way, shape, or form.
Is there going to be any pushback from the Republican Party to open up more competition and lower our energy costs in Michigan so we can be competitive and get manufacturing back to Michigan? Is anyone even talking about that in Lansing?
I've got an editorial that's supposed to go out either this week or next week on that very subject. Gary Glenn, Representative Gary Glenn's been very active on that subject. And yeah, you guys saw that data center carve-out that came out recently, right? So data center industries have a special tax exemption for their sales and use taxes. And I said, well, you know, instead of doing that, the #1 expenditure for a data center is electricity. They got to power up their equipment. They got to cool it down. Why the heck don't we focus on providing full energy choice as a means of lowering the cost of energy? Then you can incentivize businesses to come here that are high power drawers like that, and you'd also help out some other manufacturing industries, like maybe these upstart industries called auto manufacturers. So, yeah, I think there's better solutions, and I want to try to get people in the mode of thinking, let's find solutions that work for everybody instead of just one little lobbying group. By the way, I need to point out, too, you guys probably noticed a little button on my vest here, and that's because I serve as the state chair for the Michigan, for Michigan's Ted Cruz for President campaign. So I'm, if you guys, and so you want to talk a real weird journey? 5 years ago, we didn't know squat. We didn't know what a convention was. We didn't know, we hadn't read our Constitution thoroughly or anything like that. And next thing I know is I'm walking around with the next president of the United States. So that could be somebody in this audience right here. So we need folks for reinforcement. I know that's what Matt's working on to get up into Lansing. But please prayerfully consider the idea of getting into the mix. We need people that are good and principled, that are out to serve others instead of special interests. It's really important. Ted Cruz, if you ever read his biography, A Time for Truth, how many people have read that? The first chapter, called Mendacity, I swear it read like my own autobiography, except take out D.C., put in Lansing. It's really a good read. I recommend it highly. And by the way, I have some materials out in the back there if you guys are interested. Just a quick overview and a Constitution, Ted Cruz. And if there's one bumper sticker for the first person lucky enough to pick it up there. Yeah. Takes a principled stand, and yeah, we have the authority. I mean, what's the 10th Amendment say? Last time I looked at the Constitution, it didn't have as one of its enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8, that they had the power to regulate energy consumption throughout the country, right? But you have to have somebody that's going to stand up and say, guys, you're coloring outside of your lines of your jurisdiction. And to date, nobody's done that on anything. And, you know, for me, it gets very frustrating. I mean, I got to pick my battles where I'm going to go off and and impale myself on the stick, so to speak. And so you got to find where areas that you're going to have some success at. But there's not people standing up right now saying you guys don't have that authority. The recent SCOTUS decision on for example, overrule on gay marriage. You know, the Supreme Court does not have the authority to make law, yet we're all just rolling over saying, oh, yeah, I know we had a constitutional amendment in the state of Michigan. I know 2,688,097 people said that marriage was between a man and a woman, but we're just going to go off and roll over and do whatever 5 unelected Supreme Court justices are going to say? No. They issue an opinion, and it's called an opinion for a reason. If we want to go off and adopt it and convert it into legislation, that's the purview of the legislature. But if you read the Constitution, all legislative authority, that is all, A-L-L, all legislative authority rests with the Congress. It doesn't rest with the Supreme Court. It doesn't doesn't rest with some bozo with a pen and a phone up in the White House. It sits with the Congress. And so anyway, it's a matter of people, frankly, understanding the Constitution. That's why that social studies work that we're doing, I think, is so important. One of the key tenets of what I'm trying to promote is that it's not enough to know that we have a Constitution Declaration. That's what the current standards say. I want them to know the specific provisions of our Constitution. I want them to know that we have a limited government, that we have limited enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8, that the executive branch has limited powers, and they're defined in Article 2, Section 2, that the judicial has limited powers in Article 3, Section 2. So that's what we need to get in the mode of doing. Yeah, Tim.
Hi. Senator, thank you. This chart was very good. It's a little over my head, however. I'm a pretty simple guy. I want to make sure I understand.
Yep.
After everything we saw here, is it your opinion that we should be encouraging or voting for this situation here or not? Is Governor Snyder, I know he's pushing this expansion act again. Is that part of that whole deal?
The expansion's passed. That's a done deal. As far as whether or not that waiver is granted that would automatically repeal it per the law that was passed, that's what's up in the air right now. So there's nothing specifically from the standpoint of we the people that we can do at this point. Now it's a matter of saying department's been given a hot rock over in the form of the waiver from the federal government. I'm going to ask them to make sure that that hot rock is compliant with our statute. If it's not, that's when I get the Attorney General involved. And then the Attorney General, if it gets to that stage, that's when it will come time for everybody here to go off and lend support and say, please make sure that we adhere to the rule of law in our state. And that's an area where I think we can get involved in.
And when do you think that's going to happen?
Good question. Per statute, it's got to happen by April 30th at the latest. So it's going to be probably a discussion over the next couple of months.
And it'll be something that's out and everybody will know about it, right? I mean, isn't something going to be done in secret?
I'm doing my best to highlight what's going on about it, but I'm not so sure how many people are going to want to talk about it, to tell you the truth. So anybody who follows me on Facebook, I'm pretty active on Facebook. It's pretty almost daily. I try to put up vote explanations when we get into contentious votes, and yeah, all right, good. So just that's when you don't have money because none of the special interest lobbyists like you work with free marketing, and free advertising, which is social media. So yeah.
There has to be a number of other states that have a similar problem.
Michigan had a rather unique waiver, and one of the reasons why the federal government took so long to approve it was because they didn't want a zipper effect where other states would start adopting provisions. Some of the states are still up in the air as to whether or not they adopt Medicaid expansion. I think Florida is one of them. They got a pretty nasty little battle there right now, so they don't want to set a precedent that's keep in mind the whole purpose of Obamacare is more and more people in a Medicaid-like model. So the idea of pulling back on Medicaid expansion threatens the very essence of Obamacare. Yeah, we should be thankful for, by the way, that we did stop the state-based exchange. So, you know, I don't want to be all doom and gloom on this. I feel sometimes we don't get enough credit for some of the things we do stop. Like the fact that the roads, for example, I mean, I know 81% of the people said no to a $2 billion tax increase, but in the end, that spirited defense led to a tax increase that was only I wish I had this, but $600 million. But it could have been a lot worse. So there are folks that are listening to you, just not enough yet. So keep up the good work. Sometimes, how many of you guys get discouraged sometimes about the direction that things are going? No. Yeah, I know. Well, keep in mind, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for God has overcome the world. So don't give up. This is a tough part about it. I get in the mode where I just want to sit there and go, I got to go to Lansing again. You know, it's not. It's probably my least favorite job I've ever had in my life, but it's one of the most important ones that we've had. And I always harken back to, you guys ever read Dave McCullough's book 1776? And you know, they're talking about the bloody stumps and about on the battle when they're coming from Valley Forge out to Trenton. And you know, we've got it so easy here compared to where folks were before. So please don't get discouraged. We really do need the help. I'm seeing some bright spots. There's folks in the House that are coming up that have a more conservative worldview here. We didn't lose this appreciation for limited government overnight, and it's going to be tough to take it back. So please just don't give up on it. There's a lot of work left to do. And by the way, getting this guy in the White House will help quite a bit on the to get us on that right direction here.
I'm wondering what your opinion is on the Article 5 Convention of States.
Yeah. There's a compact. Actually, Senator Green was the one who sponsored a bill. I think it's Senate Bill 306. I'm trying to remember the number here. That there's multiple paths to get to amending the Constitution, but one of the ones that I think has been the best thought out approach to that is called the Compact for America. So it's and what it does is pushes towards balanced budget amendment with using a compact as a mechanism. So like you've got the Great Lakes Compact, if you guys are familiar with that, where multiple states got together and said, here's how we're going to govern the water in the Great Lakes. It's the same thing, and it's a constitutional mechanism, and that's the one that I've liked the most. But I am supportive of it, and I've had a lot of people that are scared that it's going to be a runaway convention, and I started out on that page, and I've walked through the legislation. There's very few pieces of legislation that I will say are well written. This Compact for America that Senator Green has is probably one of the best written pieces of legislation that I've seen in a long time. And now, Senator Green didn't do it. It was other folks that did it. But he's the one that shepherded and recognized it and taken it through the mix on it. And but Nick Dranius is one of the guys that's been behind that one in particular. And I've just seen, it's about the most thoroughly vetted legislation that I've seen to date. So personally, I'm not as concerned about amending the Constitution as I am about us actually following the one we got right now. And if we started doing that, we'd be doing a lot better too.
The one that I am supporting is by self-governance, and it's not just an amendment, it's a topic of limited government, more against the federal government, the way things are going. Yeah. So I just wondered, I've had gung-ho go for it, and then Chris Anhaw, who I highly respect, had a radio show a few days, and I've been listening to that, and I'm like, oh, darn. But I feel like I'm going to support it. I want to do something, and at least I'm going to be doing something, whether it goes anywhere. So
yeah, I'm in the mode where I support it, but it's not highest on my priority list. Highest on my priority list is getting people to realize what the Constitution we have today actually says.
Yeah. Just want to say a shout out to everybody. There is information about that Article 5 back there if you don't know about it, and what the application for the state looks like.
You mentioned that what's going to happen with Medicaid is going to be an issue coming up this year, whether it's repealed or not. Also, energy. What are other issues that are likely to come before the legislature this year, of which we should make ourselves aware and let our elected representatives know our feelings about?
Well, first, related to the issue you talked about, I've got a resolution, SCR 22, saying thank you, Governor Snyder, for hitting the pause button on the Syrian refugees. So that will be a topic. I out before Christmas because I didn't want them doing anything crazy over the Christmas holidays. So we got that introduced quickly into that mix. So we're going to have some discussions around what is going to be our policy around immigration. And my big focus is going to be on making sure that when people are coming over here, they're interested in assimilation, not just finding a new zip code. The other thing is hick attack. So all this stuff is fine and dandy around Medicaid, and I don't know if you were following closely the road debate, but one of the discussions back in August fell apart, or in July or so, July or August fell apart, some of the negotiations with the House when the governor insisted on involving the HICA tax increase as part of the discussion around the road tax. Well, the reason for that is because he didn't want to dig into the general fund bucket to go off and support this, right? So hopefully that's cleared everybody now. But now, apparently, now they're going to go back and say, okay, now we're going to go off and do the HICA tax increase. So there's going to be a lot of debate over that. My push is to have an alternative that says if we find a way to make Medicaid cost less money, then you don't have to increase the amount of money you raise to go off and pay for it. And so I'm going to be pushing for a policy or a direct primary care pilot for Medicaid population right here in Michigan that will serve as an alternative to that HICA tax. Other things on the horizon, the DPS, Detroit Public School bailout, that's going to be up there. I'm proposing an alternative to what the governor's proposing on that as well, something that won't rob Peter to pay Paul. So right now the plan is to take money from everybody's school district to go off and offset the expenses for Detroit. I've got a different approach that's going to open the door to third-party contributions that are not via taxes and provide some skin in the game and some incentive for third-party organizations that contribute to the future of individual students. And so we'll try to find another one around that. So that's another key issue. We've got the energy choice issue that we talked about. And like I said, I'm going to be having an op-ed on that coming out here shortly on that topic. So that'll be a hot and heavy battle. And just so you know, that issue is essentially, right now Michigan allows for 10% of the market is allowed to be competitively bid. There was an initial move to make that 0% and make it a fully regulated market. That's what all these commercials that you may be seeing on the TV are all about. There's a counter movement that says maybe we should have 0% regulated. And I'm in that camp. So I see it as a way to address everything from concern about the environment. So just like I can go off and buy a car that's a Prius or a hybrid or something like that, I may cost a little bit more, but I feel good about myself after I buy it. Fine, open windmill power to anybody who wants to buy a windmill. And if you want to buy coal, you can go off and buy coal, and then at a lower rate. So I want people to go off and get into that mix and use energy choice as a way of solving a lot of things, including smart meters and just basic customer service. Frankly, I'm tired of the utility coming up and telling me how my energy consumption compares to my neighbor. So, anything else? Yeah.
First off, thanks for coming out. Having known you for a long time and watching you since you got started, we're often lucky to have folks like you in the legislature. Going forward with Medicaid, recently we're unfortunately because of circumstances, my wife's been changing jobs. I'm actually going to find myself in that dilemma. So, if assuming that you get that it's a negative, you find that the state is not, or the federal government's not mentally compliant.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate that you get a favorable ruling from the Attorney General, and what do you look forward to? Because the other side, they're always 2 or 3 steps down the road.
Yeah.
What do you anticipate the government is going to have something? Maybe try to roll. It seems like every time we get a little step ahead, they'll try to rewrite some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually there's already been some movements to try to push back against direct primary care legislation that I already passed. In other words, try to make direct primary care like every other service that's out there. And it was done under the veil of transparency, right? That sounds good. Who could fight transparency? But it ended up being a paperwork nightmare, so all the admin savings that you had, they re-injected it back into the practice. So some of that stuff's happening. But my push, frankly, I'm pushing on the same track. Whether or not the Attorney General opinion comes back in a way that says that it's repealed or not, I think we need to go off and push for means of lowering the overall cost of health care in the state. And what I'm trying to do is prime the pump on this free market solution around direct primary care. In order to do that, though, you can't mandate a free market, right? That's kind of antithetical to the whole concept. But what you can do is prime the pump on demand, and if you prime the pump on demand, the supply starts coming. And I've been going around to all the different medical schools. I've been out to Michigan State, out to Wayne State, highlighting this is a new business practice opportunity that they have, and they're excited about it. So my goal right now is to prime the pump on that market, and that doesn't necessarily require a law. It just requires education. So like Matt was talking about, Dr. Chad Savage has got a practice that's already going out there. I don't know of anybody specifically in Lapeer County area that's yeah, but they're popping up everywhere. Doctors love it.
Where would we go? Is there on the website, or is there a place where you can go look and see that, like, by city where?
Google Direct Primary Care Coalition. That's probably the best place to start at this point in time, because I know of two networks. They're all in Southeast Michigan. One's dealing with Henry Ford Hospital out in Detroit, or no, West Bloomfield, and another one that's more in the Brighton Howell area. So that would be a long hike for a lot of folks around here. So, and I know of some folks up north that are implementing it, and some folks that are out west in the Kalamazoo area that are doing it onesie twosie. But it's just starting up. So, like I said, it hasn't even been a full year that this has been implemented. So, you can actually help be one of the squawk boxes to let people know what it is. And once again, I'll direct you to morninginmichigan.com for where they can find out more information about that. But Direct Primary Care Coalition is another. If you Google that, they'll have some information on that as well. That? All right. We wore out all the questions. Okay. I'm sure you guys got plenty more, but nobody wants to go into subsection B of Healthy Michigan? All right, well, thank you guys. It's been great seeing you tonight, and I want to thank Bill, too, for all the work that you've done, because he's been the voice out in the Michigan Tea Party Alliance for quite a while that I've been very active, either out in front of folks or behind the scenes, and really appreciate all the work you guys are doing. So keep the faith. We've got some good stuff that's happening, I think, and obviously, I'm very much in favor of getting this guy across the finish line to really kick things into gear. So if you ever want to help out on that, let me know. Bill knows how to get a hold of me, and I'd love to get you going on that team as well. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Nice job. Thanks, Patrick. Very good. Before we go into our closing prayer and stuff, I assume everybody got their questions answered. I just want to tell you that starting in February, okay, we will be meeting at Mayfield Township Hall. You can see it up here. Anybody not know where Mayfield Township Hall is? Yeah, it's in Mayfield. The address is here. We'll be putting out something in the paper also. And it'll be on our website, right? Now in February, it's our intention to have a forum. We have a Democratic representative and we have a Republican representative. One of them is Mr. Howell, who's here tonight. Thank you very much for coming, Gary. Hopefully we'll get some time to answer or ask them questions and get their ideas, both sides, of how they think, how they're going to help us, and what they can do to improve Michigan and particularly Lapeer County. Okay. So I just want everybody to know that. And now I think we'll have a Jim. Yeah. Jim, you got any reports for us that you want to talk about? Mr. McCluskey is Senator Green's right hand.
Not really a report, but our speaker bragged about one of my favorite items, Senate Bill 306. Some of you guys have heard of a guy by the name of Jack Spencer. If you tune in to Off the Record with Tim Skubic, I think Jack is one of their main people. And I've got a kind of a short news story. I'm going to do my best Joe newscaster impersonation. So the one thing to keep in mind, though, Jack actually wrote this in early December. So when you hear the reference to this year, just pretend he said last year. And if you hear this year, pretend that it is this year, I think, or something close to that. But it's entitled Amendment to Balance the Federal Budget May Die in GOP House Committee. Anytime you see the word may, and I can say this because I'm a former journalist, you could also put in parentheses may not. So take your pick. But this is what the way Jack put it. Barring the unforeseen, the State House will not vote this year, which is actually last year, on legislation to place Michigan in an interstate compact petitioning for a federal balanced budget amendment. The measure appears to lack sufficient votes in the House Financial Liability Reform Committee. I'm sure everybody has heard of that committee. Make it unlikely that the bill will reach the House floor before the new year. Senate Bill 306 was passed by the Senate with a whopping 26-11 vote in mid-September. Legislation would authorize Michigan's membership in a compact for a balanced budget. According to MichiganVotes.org, the bill would use the device of a multi-state compact to submit an application to Congress calling for an Article 5 convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Under this compact, the convention would be limited to proposing an amendment prohibiting Congress from increasing the national debt unless a majority of state legislatures approve the additional debt. Any of you who have gone to your web page recently will see that number, I think, just under, is it 19 trillion, if my memory is correct? Continuing with Jack's comment. Considering the nearly incalculable debt that is mounting in Washington, D.C., this legislation is about nothing less than our national fiscal security, as according to Leon, is it Drolet, State Policy Director for the Compact on a Balanced Budget Commission. The fate of SB 306 will determine whether the state of Michigan is going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. Voters across the board are increasingly feeling a sense of urgency and displaying a growing intolerance towards lawmakers who are unwilling to take action on this issue. With 6 Republicans and 3 Democrats on this particular committee, 5 of the Republicans would need to support SB 306 for it to be sent to the full House. 2 of the committee's Republicans, Representative Eric Lussler, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, of Hillsdale, and Rep. Earl Pileski of Jackson, are currently not willing to vote yes. Lussler says he needs more time to study the ramifications of the bill. Quote, more time is needed to look at this very complicated issue before I would be willing to vote yes, Lussler said. I just don't believe this is something that should be done within the bubble of having only 10 days left of this year's legislative calendar. I think that was as of probably mid-December. Meanwhile, Pileski said he has pretty much made up his mind and opposes the bill. Quote, my concerns involve a couple of things, Pileski said. We just passed another Article 5 balanced budget resolution that was something like this last session, and to turn around and pass another one seems to me would be a bit redundant. I'm also concerned about the very specific language concerning the compact process. I believe there's always a level of uncertainty involved with any political process, and to me, this resolution is unduly inflexible. The legislature approved a similar measure calling for a convention of states on a balanced budget amendment last session. The compact idea, embodied by Senate Bill 306, is designed to expedite the process and define more explicitly what the states are seeking. The compact would only take effect after 38 states have signed on. Alaska, Georgia, Mississippi, and North Dakota have already done so, and other states appear poised to join them. According to Representative Pat Somerville, Republican from New Boston, who chairs the House Financial Liability Reform Committee, there has never been much momentum among committee members for advancing the bill by last year's end. Quote, there was not sufficient support for this in the committee, but beyond that, I would say that the overall temperature so far just has not been right. There was no sense that this was a major priority at the time, especially after having already passed the other Article 5 resolution last year. Senate Bill 306 may be stalled, but that does not mean it is dead. The committee could take it up again this year, and with Republican primary elections approaching, the incentives to do so may seem stronger. Committee Chair Somerville should be commended for the support he has given Senate Bill 306 and the hearings that have been held on the legislation. Drolet said, we understand that there are some committee members who still have questions they feel need to be answered. We are looking forward to continuing to work with the committee and answer their questions. Bills can be taken up by the full House without committee action. Hopefully everybody here knows that. By means of a discharge motion. This contingency is usually restricted to only certain circumstances and situations, however. Generally, legislation that a committee fails to adopt eventually dies in the committee. Last comment, there is a nuanced debate about how to work for a federal balanced budget. Nick Dranius, president of the Compact for America, makes the case for, quote, why Michigan should compact for a federal balanced budget. I think that might actually be kind of like Senator Colbeck, some kind of an op-ed that maybe is put together. So let's hope that maybe sometime later this year we can see some action in the House on 306, and Mike and I will try to keep you posted as much as we can. And thank you for your good research, and we'll see what the follow-up will be.
Thank you very much. We try to have different people here telling us what's going on in Michigan, and when we can, what's going on in the federal government too. Matt is talking about a program here that's, I don't know if anybody's heard about this, it's Battle Cry. He's passing out literature on this, these postcards, and it's something worth looking into, so I hope you all take one. Okay, is there any other questions before we conclude with our prayer? I want to thank you all for coming. Hope to see you all at Mayfield on February 2nd, okay, at 7 o'clock again. Thank you all.
Everybody stand with me, please. Lord, we thank you for bringing Senator Colbeck to enlighten our group about important issues facing our state and nation. Strengthen him in his fight for liberty and his stand for Christian values. Bless his family and keep them safe. Raise up more courageous, liberty-minded men and women to run for elected positions in the local, state, and federal branches of government. Guide everyone home safely tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.